Hello, welcome to the next video. In this video, we're going to talk about try and except. And that's Python's version of try and catch. If you're coming to Python from another language like, Java or C++ or PowerShell, but it's a way of catching exceptions that are thrown when an error gets generated, okay? So that can be useful for maybe making a more user-friendly error message to display something to the end user when something goes wrong, or for logging purposes, writing errors to a log and exceptions, or you could have auxiliary code nested inside of the except block and have that code executed on an error and maybe make it so that your program, your application can recover from that error or mitigate or handle uh, that exception, that error in some fashion. Okay, so a very useful tool, and with Python, it's very straightforward, very logical. I love the way Python does this. So in our first example, we're going to run a function, and it generates no errors. Okay, we have two strings. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty. So message 1 and message 2, we're just going to concatenate them together. And it shouldn't be any problem. They're both strings. We're allowed to do that in Python. So let's run this, F5. Okay. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty. No problem concatenating those two together. Let's make an error on purpose, okay? We're going to say fourscore and message 1 is a string, but message 2 is a different data type. It's an integer. It's not a string. Message 3 is a string. So the problem is trying to concatenate these together. This is going to generate a type error because, in this case, message 2, it's the wrong data type. It's an integer. We would have to convert it to a string, pass it into the string method here, and then our code would fly. Then it would work and it wouldn't generate a type error. But we're going to generate this error on purpose here, okay? So let's go down here. We'll comment this one out. Let's uncomment make an error. And let's generate that error, okay? Clear F5, we'll run it. Boom! And there's our type error, right? It's the wrong data type. We can't concatenate a string to an integer. It has to be string, the same data type, all string material. So let's stop debugging here. Just wanted to show you that the exception that it throws. Now we're going to go run a third function. This is an example catch any. This is the simplest type of try and except in Python, okay? It's just the keyword try, the code where you expect an error to be generated, or where an error might be generated, where you want to be cautious. So, and then what do you want to happen? If an error does get generated, if an exception is thrown, you want to catch that exception, and that's the except block. So this is the code. This is what will happen in the event of an error, in the event of an exception. So we'll just say there was a problem printing. A bit more friendly error message maybe, right? So again, we haven't changed this, the syntax here. We still have a problem. We're still trying to concatenate two different data types, and that will generate a type error. But this time we're going to catch that exception that gets thrown because we're trying. This code here is now in a try block, and this code here, which is our contingency, this is what we'll do if an error is generated. That'll display a more user-friendly message, right? So I hit F5, let's run it. And then notice down here it says, okay, there was a problem printing. So it still threw the type error exception, but we caught the exception and we handled it in the except block. Let's take a look at another block of code here. So that's the simplest type of try and except, okay? We'll just catch any old error. But what if you are, you could generate multiple types of errors. You could throw different exceptions contextually based on what's going on in your code. So how do you handle more than one exception? What if there's, 3, 4, or 5 exceptions? Well, you can specify the exact exception that you want to catch after the except statement in your except block. And then you can add other except blocks. If I wanted to, I could have 5, 6, even a dozen different except blocks, each catching a different type of error. And then at the very bottom, if I just have except by itself, if none of those other conditions were met, none of those other exceptions were thrown and caught, then this would sort of be my catch-all. This is what would, you know, this is what would finally be executed, the code in this block, if none of the others applied, and yet somehow an error was still generated or an exception was still thrown. So again, we're generating the same error, but here we're going to explicitly, not implicitly as before, but explicitly catch a type error. And then here, if it were some other problem, we would display error has occurred. So again, let's run our code. And it tells us a type error has occurred, right? Because it was a type error. If it had been some other error, this except block would have ran its code. Okay, so again, we're trying the same principle as the simple one up here, but we're extending the concept by this is how we would catch a specific type of exception error. And then this is how we could handle anything that we didn't have a specific except block coded to handle. Okay, so let's look at another function here. We'll generate a different type of error. Okay, so here we have an undeclared variable. All right, we haven't defined it, we haven't declared it, and that would generate a name error type exception. And so we're going to specifically catch that, a name error. And let's, you know what, just to show you, let's copy and paste this. And so we have one for a name error. And one for a type error. And then here, if it's neither a name error or a type error, but some other error, some other exception that was thrown, this is going to be sort of our catch-all except block. But 3 different except blocks, and we can add more if we want to for more, different types of error. But let's run this, and again, just showing you how to catch a very specific type of exception error. I hit F5. Notice it says a name error exception has occurred. So it was this except block that caught the code we were trying, in this case an undeclared variable, okay? Let's take a look at our next one. And we'll look at try and except with else. Okay. And this is just showing, this is another way, just another way to code try and catch blocks or try and except in Python, but try and code here, 4 and 7 years ago, message, exception error, a generic exception. We're not catching anything specific in this instance, but if there's no problem, if there's no error, then we can combine try and except with else, and we'll just run this code here, okay? So let's run it. See, no exceptions thrown, everything is a-okay. So our else block is being executed. So there's another option for try and catch or try and except using else if there are no issues, no errors. Okay, let's comment that out. Now let's look at finally. So here in this example, we're using the keyword finally. We have our try block, we have our except block to catch an exception when it's thrown, the code that's being tried, and then finally, this will execute whether an exception is thrown or not. And there are plenty of situations where you're going to want to execute some code whether there's an error or whether there's no error, okay? So that's what would happen with finally. So if we run this example here, let's clear the screen, hit F5. Notice finally, whether an exception was thrown or not, we are at the end here. And that's our finally block. So try, except, and finally. Let's go run the next method here. Throwing custom exceptions. Okay. So in this case, we have an undeclared error, and that would normally, give us a name error, but we can define our own. Let's say I want to call it a Gettysburg error, for whatever reason, because we seem to be stuck in the Gettysburg Address this morning. Okay, well, if I want to call that exception a Gettysburg error, I can. I use the keyword raise, exception, parentheses, and then in parentheses and double quotes, Gettysburg error, okay? And then here I can catch it, except exception as, in this case, if it was a Gettysburg error, then, hey, I'll print danger Will Robinson, alert Mr. Lincoln, a Gettysburg error has been triggered, okay? So again, in this block I'm trying here, and look, I have an undeclared variable, but instead of the default Python, exception here, in this case, it would normally be a name error. I'm not going to catch a name error. I'm going to define my own with the keyword raise, a Gettysburg error. And then I'm going to catch it in this except block. And if exception as Gettysburg error, which I defined with the keyword raise up here, then it'll just display Gettysburg error. So if we run this code, look, let's watch what happens. Inside function throwing custom exceptions, danger Will Robinson, a Gettysburg error has been triggered. All right, so I defined my own exception, and then I caught that exception in the except block in this example. And let's take a look at our last example here. Okay. And then this is an example, I'm not using try or except. I just raise in a type error. Only numbers int are allowed and supercalifragilistic. Just my Julie Andrews on the brain this lately, but age is Puff the Magic Dragon. Well, that's not an age, but so let's see what happens if we run this code here. I'm gonna hit F5. So look, it throws it, but look at what it says here. Only numbers int are allowed and supercalifragilistic, right? That's what I told it to do here. So when it throws the exception, it's still going to generate the error. In this case, we're not catching it. We don't have an except block to handle it, but we can add additional information to it by using the raise keyword. So maybe this will be the shortest Python video I've ever created, but just to show you the usefulness of trying and code you can put into your try block, except code you can put into your except block, finally, and raise. Well, thanks for watching the video. If you like it, please click subscribe and hit the notification bell, and then when I make another one, you'll be notified. See you in the next video.